Welcome to Tales by GB, the home of powerful folktales, mystery stories, and long-forgotten truths from the past. If you're new here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Every story told here is slowly narrated, professionally written, and built for folktale lovers just like you. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's tale. Episode 1 begins. 55 years ago, the street of Holygrobe was full of laughter, warmth, and generous people. Children played under the tall oak trees while neighbors shared meals and stories and helped one another like family. It was a place of peace, a place where the sun always seemed to shine. On that same street stood a proud building, a well-known research center called the Curatech Lab. The lab was not just any science place. It was special. It was filled with medical doctors, top researchers, and brilliant scientists who focused on the deep mysteries of human health and disease. They were curious minds. They wanted to understand how deadly diseases came into existence, and most importantly, how to cure them. Life in Holygrobe was beautiful. People lived in joy, in peace, and with pride, knowing the world's best doctors were right on their street. But then, one day came, a day that changed everything forever. A day that no one ever saw coming. A day that left the whole street in silence, and darkness, and death. In the Curatech Lab, there worked a young scientist named Elijah. Elijah was one of the best medical scientists ever known in America. His mind was sharp, his heart was strong, and he believed in saving lives. One quiet afternoon, Elijah made a discovery that could have changed the world forever. He found a cure for HIV. Yes, a real cure. After long years of studying, researching, and testing, he finally cracked it. The lab was about to make history. But Elijah wasn't the only brilliant mind inside that building. Another scientist named Philip was working on something very, very different. Philip wasn't focused on diseases. No, he was focused on something beyond life. He wanted to know, where does the spirit of a dead person go after death? Is reincarnation real? Does the soul travel into another body? Is there really a place called hell? Philip was determined to find out the truth. He was bold, he was brave, but he was also playing with fire, because some questions should never be asked, and some doors should never be opened. While Elijah worked on healing, Philip worked on the unknown. That same day, deep inside the Curatech Lab, an experiment was going on. Elijah and Philip, along with 5 other scientists, were in the lab room. Beakers, machines, chemicals, strange wires. The energy in the room was tense. Something didn't feel right. Then suddenly, the lights went off. The entire lab went dark. In that moment, the mixture of strange chemicals began to growl. Yes, not bubble, not steam. Growl. It glowed blue, almost like lightning inside a glass. And then, boom! An explosion shook the room. The walls trembled, the floor cracked, and the whole lab was covered with strange, sophisticated smoke no one had ever seen before. It was thick. It was glowing. And it carried a smell so strong, the doctors began to cough violently. Their lungs burned, their eyes turned red. They screamed for help, but no sound escaped. The smoke was alive. Elijah fought to breathe. He held his nose, crawled on the floor, and ran for the door. He escaped, but Philip and the other 5 doctors, including 2 top scientists, did not. They died right there in the Curatech Lab. Elijah didn't stop running. He rushed downstairs, he pushed the doors open, he jumped into his car that was parked outside, and he drove away. His hands shook, his heart raced. Tears filled his eyes as he looked back at the burning lab. But that wasn't the end. No, something worse was coming. Much worse. The chemicals that exploded formed a dangerous gas. The gas had a life of its own. It began to spread. First, from the lab room upstairs, then downstairs, then through the windows, escaping into the street. That day, families were in their homes, cooking, laughing, telling bedtime stories. But the gas moved silently. It crept through windows, through air vents, through cracks in doors, and then people started coughing. Their throats burned. Their eyes turned red. They couldn't breathe. Children collapsed. Mothers screamed. Fathers fell to their knees. Birds flying above the street dropped from the sky. Dogs in the backyard stopped barking and froze. No living thing on Holygrobe Street survived. The entire street was dying in silence. Elijah reached his home miles away from the lab. He jumped out of the car, ran inside, and raised the alarm. He told his neighbors, his friends, his family, something terrible has happened. The people listened. They took him seriously, and they made a call to the authorities. Within the hour, the police, known as the Corps, arrived at Holygrobe. But when they stepped onto the street, they stopped. Their faces turned pale. Their voices shook. The air was no longer clear. It had turned red. Reddish smoke filled the sky. There were no sounds, no children, no footsteps, not even a bird chirping. The street was dead. The officers put on their face masks, tightened their gloves, and stepped forward to find out what was really going on. That was why the police had come. But they had no idea what they were about to face. They were 5 in number, each one of them, fully trained, brave, and equipped for danger. But what waited for them on Holygrobe Street was not an ordinary emergency. It was not a fire, not a robbery, not a chemical spill. It was something not from this world. As the officers stepped forward, their boots echoed in the dead silence. The reddish air clouded their vision. They could hardly see 10 feet ahead, but they kept walking. Each breath through their masks felt heavy, like they were breathing in iron dust. Then, the first body appeared. It was lying by the sidewalk, face down, motionless. The skin was pale, the eyes wide open, and the mouth still frozen in a scream. One of the officers bent down. He checked the pulse. Nothing. Completely gone. They looked ahead. More bodies. Neighbors, children, pets. Some had collapsed holding hands. Others were still seated at dinner tables inside open doors, never knowing it would be their last meal. One officer whispered, "This wasn't just a gas leak. This was something else." They moved forward toward the lab, the place where it all started. As they approached the Curatech building, the reddish air began to glow. Not just red, but now with flashes of blue and purple, just like the chemical that Elijah had described. Then they heard it, a sound, not a voice, not a machine, not wind, but something else, something that sounded like whispers. Yes, voices whispering from inside the building. But the lab was supposed to be empty. Everyone inside had died, hadn't they? One officer raised his flashlight and pointed it toward the shattered windows. The walls inside the lab were glowing. Strange symbols were scribbled across the broken glass. And on the main door, written in thick black smoke, were the words, "You open the passage." They froze. "What passage?" one asked. "What is this place?" Their radios stopped working. Their phones went dead. Even their watches stopped ticking. Time had stopped. One officer began to cough. Another collapsed. Whatever was in the air was still active, and now it was angry. They turned to leave, but one of them, Officer Miller, heard a sound from inside the lab. A voice, calling his name. "Miller." He stopped. He looked around. "Who's there?" he asked. No reply. "Miller, it's me. Don't you recognize my voice?" It sounded like his younger brother, Marcus, who died 3 years ago. But Marcus was gone. He had drowned in a lake accident. There was no way, yet the voice was clear. Too clear. Officer Miller stepped forward toward the lab entrance. The others called out, "No, don't go in, Miller." But it was too late. He entered. The door closed behind him by itself. What happened to him remains a mystery to this day. He never walked back out. The remaining officers rushed back to their van. They reported what they saw, and the government immediately ordered Holygrobe Street to be marked as a red zone. No entry, no visitors, no rebuilding, no discussion. The Curatech Lab was sealed off. The entire street was surrounded with iron gates. Warning signs and electric fences were placed all around. And the truth? Hidden. People were told it was a chemical explosion, an accident, a tragic loss. But that's not the full story. The full story was kept in secret files, and even today, those files are locked away. But there's more, because something strange started happening years after the tragedy. People living in towns miles away from Holygrobe started reporting sightings. Sightings of people walking along the highway in the middle of the night, wearing lab coats, covered in reddish fog, and whispering strange words. One man swore he saw a boy, covered in dust, standing on the edge of the woods with glowing eyes. Another woman claimed she heard knocking on her window at 3 a.m., but no one was there, only the sound of heavy breathing. And in every report, the witnesses described the same thing: a burning smell, a red mist, and the feeling that they were being watched. One day, a curious teenager named Ethan, who lived 2 towns away, decided to investigate. He had heard the rumors, he had read the old news. He wanted to see Holygrobe with his own eyes. So late one evening, Ethan snuck out, hopped on his bike, and rode all the way to the edge of the forbidden street. The gate was still there. The warning sign still stood. But the mist was waiting. And when Ethan looked through the iron bars, he saw something move. A figure, standing at the very center of the street. It looked like a man, but it wasn't moving like one. It was hovering, breathing heavy, and in its hand was an ID badge, and the name on it was Philip, the scientist who died in the explosion. Ethan blinked. The figure was gone, but from that day on, Ethan was never the same. He stopped talking, stopped eating, and every night he would sit by the window and whisper one name, Holygrobe. That name stayed on Ethan's lips for weeks. His mother grew worried. His friends couldn't understand. His teachers thought he needed help. But Ethan was far gone. He had seen something that no teenager should ever see. He had looked into the mouth of Holygrobe, and something in there had looked back. Every night, he sat by the window, in complete silence, his face turned to the sky. He whispered softly over and over, Holygrobe, Holygrobe, until one evening, he didn't whisper anymore. He vanished. His window was wide open. His shoes were still by the bed, but Ethan was nowhere to be found. And in his place on the floor was a tiny silver badge. It read, Elijah, Research Team Curatech. Yes, Elijah. The same Elijah who discovered the cure for HIV. The same Elijah who escaped the explosion. The same Elijah who vanished after raising the alarm. No one had heard from him since that terrible day. Some believed he fled the country. Others said he went mad and was placed in a secret hospital. But now his badge had returned. And it came through Ethan. What did this mean? Could Elijah still be alive? And if so, where had he been for the past 55 years? Meanwhile, deep in the forests outside Holygrobe, a man walked barefoot through the woods. His beard was thick, his eyes were hollow, but there was a light in him, a fire that would not die. It was Elijah. He was alive, but not as he once was. Elijah had spent years in hiding, not just from the world, but from what he had seen in the aftermath of the explosion. Because Elijah knew the truth. He had seen it before anyone else. He had seen what Philip had accidentally opened. It wasn't just about chemicals. It wasn't just about research. It was a gate. Philip, in his obsession with life after death, had combined spiritual essence with physical energy. And the explosion wasn't just scientific. It was supernatural. It tore open a passage, a tear in the veil that separates the living from the dead. And from that tear, things came through. Things with no shape, things with no voice, things that whispered. Elijah had run not because he was afraid to die. He had run because he had seen what comes after death, and he had vowed to never speak of it. But now, with Ethan missing and his badge returned, he knew it was time to return. Holygrobe was calling him back. Back in town, news of Ethan's disappearance spread like wildfire. The local news covered it. Old residents of Holygrobe began to speak again. The police reopened their cold case files, and across town in a dusty old bookstore, a retired librarian named Miss Ellen remembered something chilling. She pulled out an old newspaper, yellow with age. The headline read, 7 scientists die in Curatech Lab gas explosion. She turned to the photo. There was Elijah smiling beside Philip. But her hand trembled when she looked at the last page. Because there, drawn in faded ink, was a sketch made by a boy who survived that day but was too young to talk back then. He had drawn what he saw through his window, the last image before the gas hit. It was a door, not a lab door, but an ancient, towering stone door floating in the air, with shadows reaching out from it. And written under it, in the shaky writing of a child, were the words, "They opened it. Now they can't close it." Elijah's return to Holygrobe. With heavy steps, Elijah returned to the gates of Holygrobe Street. His body was older, his mind full of battle scars, but he still carried one thing no one else had: the knowledge of what truly happened. He knew the gas was not gas. He knew the explosion was not just chemical. He knew that the red mist was a spiritual toxin, and he knew that something was still feeding off the silence in Holygrobe. So he brought with him one final creation, a machine, handmade, simple-looking, but powerful. It was called the Closer, a device designed to do what Philip never could, seal the gate, but it required one thing, a sacrifice, a life. One soul, willing to trade itself to pull back the flood of spirits that had bled into our world. Elijah stood at the edge of the ruined lab. The mist began to swirl, the whispers grew louder, the symbols on the lab walls lit up again, and then they came. The spirits, the lost scientists, the whispers of children, the shadowy forms that had haunted the town. They knew he was back, and they were angry. But Elijah wasn't afraid. He powered up the closer. The machine began to hum. The gate flickered into view, still open, still breathing. He stepped forward, one last time, and said, "I'm sorry, Philip, but I have to fix this." With a final press, Elijah activated the closer, and in a flash of light, he disappeared. The mist collapsed. The whisper stopped, and for the first time in 55 years, Holygrobe was silent, truly silent. But as the story ends, there's one last thing. A week later, on the outskirts of Holygrobe, a little girl was walking home from school. She passed by the old iron gate, and in the bushes beside it, she found a small metal badge. It was dusty, old, but the name on it was clear. Ethan. The little girl stared at the badge. It was cold in her hand. Too cold, and the moment she touched it, the air around her shifted. The wind went still, birds stopped singing, and a quiet whisper slid into her ear, "Return to Holygrobe." She dropped the badge and ran home. She never spoke of it again, but the badge remained exactly where she left it, as if waiting. Uncovering what the government hid, in the weeks that followed, reports began to resurface. People were starting to ask questions. The old files were being dug up, and more horrifying truths started to come to light. It turned out, not all the victims were recovered after the Curatech explosion. Yes, most of the scientists and doctors were found dead. Their bodies were burned, their lungs melted by the red gas. But 3 were never found. Their names? Dr. Miles Raymond, Dr. Cassandra Lee, Dr. Henry Cole, veteran doctors, brilliant minds, and deeply involved in the same experiment that Philip had created. Their disappearance confused even the rescue team. No bones, no bodies, no blood, nothing, just gone. But now, decades later, a truth was whispered through forgotten channels. A terrifying possibility: they hadn't died, they had changed. Witness accounts, monsters in the mist. Several night workers, street cleaners, and forest rangers reported the same thing. While patrolling near the Holygrobe perimeter, they saw figures, humanoid in shape, but twisted in form. Their skin was dry and pale, like ash. Their eyes glowed a dull green, like broken neon lights. Their mouths were black and constantly dripping, red mist. They moved through the shadows, not walking, but gliding. They were feeding on the leftover poison in the air. It was said they couldn't step outside the barrier that surrounded Holygrobe, because the gas that transformed them was also the only thing keeping them alive. And this raised a question that nobody wanted to answer. Does this mean vampires were born? Are these things, these red-eyed, gas-fed creatures, the first scientific vampires ever to walk the earth? Or worse, have vampires always existed? And were these just the latest ones, born from the sins of man and the hunger of science? Science meets folklore. Most cultures believe vampires feed on blood, but they feed on air, on red smoke, on chemical toxins, on the souls of the dead. They do not bite. They do not fly. They breathe, and where they breathe, life disappears. These monsters, once doctors of hope, had been reshaped into spirits of death. And what makes them even more dangerous? They remember who they were. They still wear their lab coats, their ID tags, their broken glasses, and they whisper to each other in the language of the lab, scientific codes, formulae, equations, as if they're still trying to finish the work that destroyed them. The final report. A secret report from a retired field agent was leaked anonymously online. In that report, the agent detailed one final encounter. He wrote, open quote, "At 3:33 a.m., I saw 3 figures standing at the gate. They did not try to leave. They did not speak, but they stared at me like they knew me, like they were calling me by name. And then one of them smiled." Close quote. That agent never returned to duty. He moved far away, changed his name, and warned anyone he could, do not go near Holygrobe, and if you must, never breathe in. The final word. And so the tale ends. The story of Holygrobe Street, a place once filled with laughter, turned to silence, death, and whispers in the red mist. Elijah is gone. Ethan is gone. 3 scientists became something else. And no one truly knows if Holygrobe is sleeping or waiting. But one thing is sure. This story is not just about a street. It's about a warning, a lesson, that some experiments must never be made. Some doors must never be opened. And some things, once changed, can never be undone. Thank you for listening to Tales by GB. We hope you enjoyed this special 4-part folktale series, Reasons Why No Human Lived Close to This Street. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. New episodes drop every week with deeper stories, slower narration, and unforgettable journeys into the unknown. Until next time, keep your windows closed at night and stay away from streets that no longer appear on the map. The end.